Marcus Thompson stepped off the plane at London Heathrow Airport with a huge smile on his face and his phone already recording. The 28-year-old man from California had big dreams for his trip to England. He wanted to make videos that would make him famous on the internet. Marcus had brown hair that was always perfectly styled and wore expensive clothes that showed off his flashy lifestyle. He carried 3 different phones and 2 cameras because he never wanted to miss a chance to film something exciting. As Marcus walked through the airport, he was already talking to his phone camera like it was his best friend. He told his 50,000 followers about his amazing trip plans and how he was going to show them the real London that other tourists never see. Marcus thought he was very smart and funny. He believed that people in England would love his American sense of humor and his bold personality. The truth was that Marcus had never really traveled anywhere outside of California before, and he did not understand that other countries had different ways of doing things. Marcus grabbed his expensive luggage and headed straight to his hotel in the heart of London. The taxi driver was a quiet older man who had been driving in London for 30 years. Marcus immediately started filming the taxi ride and asking the driver silly questions about the Queen and British food. The driver answered politely, but Marcus could not tell that the man was getting annoyed with all the cameras and loud talking. Marcus kept making jokes about British accents and trying to copy the way people talked. He thought this was very entertaining, but the taxi driver just wanted the ride to end quickly. When Marcus arrived at his fancy hotel near Westminster, he made sure to film everything. He recorded the doorman opening his taxi door. He filmed the lobby with its beautiful old decorations. He even recorded himself checking in at the front desk while making comments about how different everything was from America. The hotel staff smiled and stayed professional, but Marcus was too excited about his videos to notice their uncomfortable expressions. He tipped everyone with crisp 20-pound notes because he wanted to show his followers how generous and wealthy he was. Marcus got to his room on the 5th floor and immediately went to the window to film the view of the famous London streets below. He could see Big Ben in the distance and the Thames River flowing through the city. This made him even more excited about the content he was going to create. Marcus spent an hour just filming different angles of his hotel room and talking about his plans. He told his followers that he was going to do things in London that no other American tourist had ever dared to try. He promised them that his videos would be so amazing that they would go viral around the world. The next morning, Marcus woke up early and put on his most colorful outfit. He wore a bright red shirt with white pants and golden sneakers that cost more than most people make in a week. Marcus wanted to stand out in every crowd and make sure that everyone would notice him. He styled his hair with expensive gel and practiced his best smile in the mirror. Marcus truly believed that he was going to become an internet superstar during this trip to London. Marcus packed all his camera equipment into a designer backpack and headed out into the busy London streets. The morning air was crisp, and the city was already full of people heading to work. Marcus started filming immediately as he walked down the sidewalk. He made loud comments about everything he saw, from the old buildings to the red double-decker buses. Local people walking by gave him strange looks, but Marcus thought they were just impressed by his confidence and style. As Marcus explored the Westminster area, he felt more and more excited about the possibilities ahead of him. Marcus walked through the busy streets of London with his phone held high in front of his face. He was live-streaming to his followers and getting more excited with each step toward Buckingham Palace. The famous royal residence was only a few blocks away from his hotel, and Marcus could hardly contain his enthusiasm. He had seen pictures of the palace online, but being there in person felt like stepping into a movie. The grand buildings and historic streets made Marcus feel like he was about to create the most amazing content of his entire career. As Marcus got closer to the palace, he started seeing more and more tourists with cameras and guidebooks. Families from all over the world were taking photos and enjoying the beautiful summer morning. Marcus pushed through the crowds while still filming himself and making commentary about everything around him. He talked loudly about how he was going to show his American followers something they had never seen before. Other tourists started noticing Marcus because of his bright clothes and loud voice, but he thought they were just admiring his confidence. When Marcus finally reached the front gates of Buckingham Palace, his jaw dropped open in amazement. The massive building stretched out before him, with its perfect stone walls and countless windows gleaming in the morning sunlight. The famous balcony where the royal family appeared during special events looked exactly like it did in all the photographs Marcus had seen growing up. But what really caught his attention were the guards standing perfectly still at their posts around the palace grounds. The Queen's guards were everything Marcus had hoped they would be and more. They wore their traditional bright red uniforms with shiny gold buttons that caught the light beautifully. Their tall black bearskin hats made them look like something from a fairy tale or history book. Each guard held a rifle and stood completely motionless like statues that had been carved from stone. Marcus had heard stories about these guards before, but seeing them in person was totally different from anything he could have imagined. Marcus immediately started filming the guards while explaining to his followers what he was seeing. He told them about the history of the guards and how they were famous for never moving or reacting to tourists, no matter what happened around them. Marcus had done some research before his trip and knew that thousands of people tried every day to make the guards laugh or smile or move in some way. Most tourists took a few photos and then moved on to see other parts of the palace, but Marcus had much bigger plans. The idea started forming in Marcus' mind as he watched the guards standing so perfectly still in the morning heat. He realized that this was his golden opportunity to create viral content that would make him famous around the world. Marcus had always been good at getting attention and making people laugh back home in California. He was confident that he could succeed where thousands of other tourists had failed. Marcus believed that his American charm and creativity would be exactly what it took to break through the legendary discipline of the Queen's Guards. Marcus positioned himself at the perfect angle where his phone camera could capture both him and one of the guards in the same shot. He made sure the lighting was good and that his followers could see everything clearly. The guard he chose was standing near the main entrance and looked to be about the same age as Marcus. The guard had a serious expression and stared straight ahead without seeming to notice any of the tourists around him. Marcus started his plan by telling his live stream audience about his mission to make one of the famous guards react. Marcus started his performance with what he thought were harmless jokes and funny faces. He stood in front of the guard and began making silly expressions while his phone camera captured everything. Marcus stuck out his tongue and crossed his eyes and made exaggerated, surprised looks. He thought he was being clever and entertaining, but the guard remained completely still like a statue. Marcus expected at least a tiny smile or a quick glance, but got absolutely nothing in return. The lack of reaction only made Marcus more determined to succeed. He began talking to his live stream audience about how impressive the guard's discipline was, but also how he was going to be the first person to crack their serious exterior. Marcus' followers were watching in real time and typing encouraging messages in the chat. They were sending laughing face emojis and telling Marcus to try harder and be more creative with his attempts. Marcus decided to step up his game and started doing a silly dance around the guard. He moved his arms in wild motions and did exaggerated marching steps while humming made-up military songs. Other tourists stopped what they were doing to watch Marcus' unusual behavior. Some people seemed amused by his antics, but others looked uncomfortable and started whispering to each other about the loud American tourist making a scene. When dancing did not work, Marcus tried making funny noises and sound effects. He pretended to be a trumpet and made loud honking sounds. He imitated the sound of marching boots on pavement. Marcus even tried making animal noises like a rooster crowing and a dog barking. The guard continued to stare straight ahead without moving a single muscle. Marcus was getting frustrated, but his online audience was growing larger as more people joined his live stream to see what would happen next. Marcus then decided to try mimicking the guard's posture and movements. He stood up very straight and held his arms stiffly at his sides. Marcus put on a serious facial expression and tried to copy the way the guard was standing. But instead of being respectful, Marcus made his imitation look ridiculous and exaggerated. He made his face look overly stern and puffed out his chest in an unnatural way that looked more like a cartoon character than a real soldier. The mocking became more obvious as Marcus started pretending to march, like the guards do during their ceremonial duties. He lifted his knees up very high and swung his arms in dramatic motions while making a fake serious expression. Marcus added his own commentary in a fake British accent that sounded terrible and insulting. He called the guards toy soldiers and living dolls and other names that showed he did not understand or respect what they represented. Marcus' followers online were eating up every moment of his performance. The viewer count kept climbing higher and higher as people shared his live stream with their friends. Marcus felt the rush of going viral, and it made him want to push even further. He was so focused on his phone screen and the positive reactions from his audience that he completely missed the warning signs developing around him. Some of the other tourists were starting to look genuinely upset by Marcus' behavior. Parents were pulling their children away from the area because they did not want them to see such disrespectful treatment of the palace guards. A few older British visitors were shaking their heads and making disapproving comments about Marcus' lack of manners and respect for British traditions. But Marcus was too caught up in his moment of internet fame to notice any of the negative reactions from the people actually standing around him. Marcus felt like he was on top of the world as his livestream numbers continued to climb higher than they had ever been before. The positive comments and laughing emojis from his online followers made him feel invincible and creative. Marcus decided that simple funny faces and silly dances were not enough anymore. He needed to do something bigger and more dramatic to keep his audience entertained and engaged with his content. Marcus began making personal comments about the guard who was still standing perfectly still in front of him. He started by joking about the guard's serious facial expression and saying that he looked like he had never smiled in his entire life. Marcus told his livestream audience that the guard probably did not know how to have fun or enjoy himself. These comments got lots of reactions from his followers who thought Marcus was being hilarious and bold. Encouraged by the positive response, Marcus pushed his comments further into dangerous territory. He began questioning whether the guards were real men or just people playing dress-up games for tourists. Marcus made jokes about their colorful uniforms and said they looked like characters from a children's book rather than actual soldiers. He laughed at their tall, fuzzy hats and said they made the guards look silly and ridiculous instead of strong and brave. The insults became more vicious and personal as Marcus felt the power of his growing online audience. He suggested that the guards were too weak and scared to react to anything he did. Marcus called them fake tough guys who were probably afraid of their own shadows. He made jokes about their families and said that their wives and children must be embarrassed to have such cowardly men in their lives. Marcus did not realize that his words were being heard by everyone around him, including other tourists and local British people who were visiting the palace. The crowd was becoming more and more uncomfortable with his behavior, but Marcus was too focused on his phone screen to notice their reactions. He was reading the comments from his followers and getting more excited about how many people were watching his live stream. What Marcus completely failed to understand was that these were not just ceremonial figures standing around for decoration. The Queen's guards were real soldiers who had served their country in dangerous places around the world. Many of them had been deployed to war zones and had seen combat situations that Marcus could not even imagine. They had trained for years to develop the discipline and self-control that allowed them to stand guard at the palace without reacting to distractions. The guard that Marcus was targeting had actually served 3 tours of duty in Afghanistan, where he had lost close friends and fellow soldiers. He had earned medals for his bravery and leadership under fire. The guard had chosen to serve at Buckingham Palace as an honor after his combat service, but he was still a highly trained warrior who deserved respect and recognition for his sacrifices. Marcus continued his stream of insults and mockery without any idea of who he was really talking about. He made comments about the guards' intelligence and suggested they were too stupid to understand what was happening around them. Marcus joked that they were like robots or puppets being controlled by someone else instead of real thinking human beings with feelings and emotions. The tension in the air was becoming thick and dangerous, but Marcus was completely oblivious to what he was creating. Even some of his online followers were starting to leave comments suggesting that maybe he should stop and move on to something else. A few people in the chat were saying that his behavior was going too far and becoming disrespectful, but Marcus was too caught up in the moment to read those warnings. Marcus was about to discover that there are real consequences for treating people badly even when you think you are just making entertaining content for the internet. Sergeant James Mitchell had been standing at his post for 2 hours when the loud American tourist first appeared with his cameras and bright clothing. The sergeant was a decorated soldier who had served his country with honor and pride for over 10 years. He had learned to control his emotions and reactions through years of military training and real combat experience in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. But as Marcus continued his relentless stream of insults and mockery, something deep inside the sergeant began to stir. James had lost his best friend David in an explosion in Afghanistan 3 years earlier. David had been standing right next to him when the bomb went off, and James still carried the guilt and pain of surviving when his friend did not. The memory of David's sacrifice and the sacrifice of so many other brave soldiers made Marcus' words cut deeper than the tourist could possibly understand. James' jaw began to tighten almost imperceptibly as Marcus continued his performance. The sergeant's hand slowly clenched around his rifle as he fought to maintain his professional composure. Years of training told him to ignore the distraction and stay focused on his duty, but Marcus was pushing him toward a breaking point that few people had ever reached before. Marcus was completely unaware of the dangerous situation he was creating. He pulled out a bright yellow foam finger that he had bought from a souvenir shop earlier that morning. Marcus thought this would be the perfect prop for his final act that would guarantee his video would go viral around the world. He held up the foam finger and started waving it around while making jokes about testing whether the guards were real people or just wax figures. The crowd of tourists around Marcus had grown larger as word spread about the crazy American making a scene at the palace. Some people were recording with their own phones while others just watched in fascination and horror. Many visitors looked uncomfortable with what they were seeing, but nobody seemed willing to step forward and tell Marcus to stop his disrespectful behavior. Marcus moved closer to Sergeant Mitchell and began gently poking him with the foam finger. He started with tiny taps on the sergeant's arm, while making comments about checking if the guard was real or fake. Marcus told his livestream audience that he was conducting a scientific experiment to see if the famous guards really were just statues dressed up in fancy uniforms. The poking became more persistent as Marcus grew bolder with each tap. He moved the foam finger to different parts of the surgeon's uniform, while making running commentary about texture and temperature. Marcus poked at the gold buttons on the red jacket and tapped on the tall black hat. He was treating a decorated war veteran like a museum display that existed purely for his entertainment. Sergeant Mitchell could feel every poke and tap, but his training kept him motionless, even as his anger built to dangerous levels. The sergeant was remembering his fallen comrades and thinking about all the sacrifices that military families make every day to keep their country safe. Marcus' casual disrespect for everything the uniform represented was like a slap in the face to every soldier who had ever served. The moment seemed to stretch on forever as the crowd held its collective breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Even Marcus' online audience was beginning to sense that something serious was about to occur. Some of his followers were typing messages telling him to be careful and maybe step back, but Marcus was too focused on creating his perfect viral moment to read their warnings. Marcus raised the foam finger one final time and prepared to poke the sergeant directly in the face while making his biggest joke yet about whether the guard was actually alive or just a very realistic dummy. The foam finger moved closer and closer to the surgeon's face as Marcus grinned at his phone camera, completely unaware that he was about to cross a line that could never be uncrossed. But just as the foam finger was about to touch the surgeon's nose, something inside James Mitchell finally snapped, and the trained soldier decided that enough was enough. In one lightning-fast movement that showcased years of military training and combat experience, Sergeant James Mitchell stepped forward and caught Marcus' wrist in an iron grip. The movement was so quick and precise that Marcus barely had time to understand what was happening to him. The foam finger stopped just inches away from the surgeon's face as his strong hand completely controlled Marcus' arm. "Sir, you will step back immediately," the surgeon said in a voice that carried the full authority and power of someone who had commanded troops in life and death situations. The words were spoken calmly but with such force that everyone within 50 feet could hear them clearly. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as he realized that he was no longer in control of the situation he had created. Marcus' phone slipped from his other hand and clattered onto the stone ground with a loud crack that echoed through the sudden silence. The live stream was still running, and his thousands of followers were getting a perfect view of their confident host being completely dominated by the guard he had been mocking just seconds before. Marcus' face turned bright red with embarrassment and fear as he tried to pull his wrist free from the surgeon's grip. The surgeon's hold was firm but controlled, showing exactly the kind of professional restraint that made the Queen's Guards legendary around the world. He was not hurting Marcus, but he was making it completely clear that the disrespectful behavior was going to stop immediately. Sergeant Mitchell had dealt with much more dangerous situations in combat zones, and handling one rude tourist was well within his capabilities. Within seconds, 3 plainclothes security officers appeared as if they had materialized out of thin air. They had been watching Marcus' behavior from the beginning and were already positioned to respond the moment the situation escalated beyond what the guard could handle alone. The security team moved with the same professional efficiency as the surgeon and surrounded Marcus completely. Marcus tried to stammer out an explanation, but his usual confident voice had disappeared entirely. He kept repeating that it was just a prank and that he did not mean any harm, but nobody was interested in hearing his excuses. The security officers were polite but firm as they took control of the situation and began to escort Marcus away from the immediate area around the guard post. The crowd of tourists who had been watching Marcus' performance were now staring at him with a mixture of shock and disapproval. The very people he had been trying to entertain and impress were looking at him like he was something disgusting they had found on the bottom of their shoes. Marcus could hear people making comments about how disrespectful and embarrassing his behavior had been. Marcus' broken phone was still live streaming from the ground where it had fallen, and the camera angle was capturing the perfect view of his humiliated face and shaking hands. His thousands of followers were watching in real time as their confident entertainer was reduced to a scared and embarrassed tourist who had gotten himself into serious trouble with the authorities. Several British military veterans who had been touring the palace with their families stepped forward to express their outrage at Marcus' treatment of an active serviceman. These older men had served their country decades earlier, and they understood the dedication and sacrifice that wearing the uniform represented. They were not going to let Marcus' disrespectful behavior go unchallenged. The veterans spoke directly to Marcus about the meaning of military service and the importance of showing respect for people who risk their lives to protect others. Marcus had never been confronted by real soldiers before, and he was learning that his actions had consequences that extended far beyond his social media audience. These men had fought in real wars, and they were not impressed by his internet fame or his excuses. Marcus realized that his perfect viral moment had turned into the worst nightmare of his life. There was no way to take back what had happened in front of hundreds of witnesses and thousands of online viewers. The video evidence of his behavior and the consequences he faced were already spreading across the internet faster than he could have ever imagined possible. As the security officers maintained their professional control over the situation, Marcus found himself surrounded by hundreds of onlookers who had witnessed his entire shameful display from beginning to end. The crowd had grown much larger during his performance, and now all those people were staring at him with expressions of disgust and disappointment. Marcus could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down on him like a heavy blanket. The tourists who had initially seemed amused by his antics were now shaking their heads and making comments about how he had crossed the line from entertainment into pure disrespect. Families with children were pointing at Marcus and using him as an example of how not to behave when visiting other countries. Parents were telling their kids that this was what happened when people did not show proper respect for others. Marcus' phone was still lying on the ground with the screen cracked, but the live stream was somehow still running. The camera angle was perfect for capturing his red face and the way his hands were shaking as he tried to explain himself to the security officers. His thousands of online followers were getting a front row seat to watch their confident host being completely humiliated in front of the entire world. The comment section of his live stream was exploding with messages from viewers who could not believe what they were watching. Some people were laughing at Marcus' downfall, while others were expressing genuine anger at his disrespectful treatment of the guard. Many of his regular followers were saying they were disappointed in him and planning to unfollow his accounts immediately. A group of British tourists who had been visiting the palace with their elderly parents approached the security officers to express their outrage at what they had witnessed. These local citizens understood the history and significance of the Queen's Guards better than Marcus ever could. They explained to anyone who would listen that the guards were real soldiers who deserved respect, not mockery and ridicule. An older woman with gray hair and a gentle voice spoke directly to Marcus about how his behavior reflected poorly on all American tourists who visited London. She said that most visitors from his country were polite and respectful, but his actions would make people think badly of Americans in general. Marcus had never considered that his personal behavior could affect how people viewed his entire nation. Several teenagers who had been taking selfies near the palace gates were now recording Marcus' humiliation with their own phones. They were already uploading short video clips to their social media accounts with captions about the disrespectful American tourist who got what he deserved. Marcus' viral moment was spreading across multiple platforms in ways he had never intended. A news reporter who happened to be at the palace covering a different story noticed the commotion and began interviewing witnesses about what they had seen. The reporter was getting quotes from tourists who described Marcus' behavior as disgusting and embarrassing. These interviews would soon become part of news articles that would spread Marcus' shame to an even wider audience. Marcus kept trying to explain that he was just making content for his followers and that he did not mean to cause any real harm. But every excuse he offered sounded more pathetic and ridiculous than the last one. The security officers and the crowd around him were not interested in his explanations because his actions spoke much louder than his words. The most painful part of Marcus' humiliation was realizing that he had become exactly the kind of tourist that everyone hated. He was the ugly American who traveled to other countries without understanding or respecting their culture and traditions. Marcus had always thought he was better than those stereotypical tourists, but now he was the perfect example of everything that was wrong with his generation. As the security officers prepared to escort him completely away from the palace grounds, Marcus took one last look at the crowd of people who had watched his downfall. Their faces showed a mixture of anger, disappointment, and pity that cut him deeper than any physical punishment could have. The security officers escorted Marcus to a quiet office inside one of the buildings near the palace, where they could speak privately about the serious nature of his actions. Marcus was still shaking from the confrontation and kept asking if he was going to be arrested or sent to jail. The officers remained professional and calm as they explained the various laws and regulations that Marcus had potentially violated during his disrespectful display. Marcus learned that disturbing the peace, interfering with official duties, and showing disrespect to uniformed servicemen were all serious offenses in the United Kingdom. The officers informed him that his behavior had been recorded by multiple security cameras around the palace grounds in addition to his own live stream and the phones of other tourists. There was overwhelming evidence of everything he had done wrong. While Marcus was being questioned by the authorities, his broken phone was finally picked up by a palace maintenance worker who ended the live stream that had been running for over an hour. But the damage was already done because dozens of his followers had been recording the entire incident on their own devices. Screenshots and screen recordings of his humiliation were already spreading across social media platforms faster than Marcus could have imagined. Within the first hour after his confrontation with the guard, Marcus' name was trending on multiple social media platforms. People were sharing clips of his disrespectful behavior and the moment when Sergeant Mitchell grabbed his wrist and put him in his place. The videos were being viewed millions of times and shared with commentary about entitled tourists and the importance of respecting military service. Major news outlets picked up the story before Marcus was even released from questioning. Television news programs were showing clips of his live stream and interviewing experts about tourist behavior and cultural sensitivity. Newspaper websites published articles with headlines calling Marcus the most disrespectful American tourist of the year. His face was being broadcast around the world in the most negative way possible. Marcus' social media accounts were being flooded with angry comments from people around the globe who had seen the videos of his behavior. His Instagram posts were receiving thousands of negative comments calling him a disgrace to America and demanding that he apologize publicly. His Facebook page was being bombed with one-star reviews and angry messages from military families and veterans. Several companies that had been sponsoring Marcus' content immediately dropped him when they saw the negative publicity surrounding his name. A clothing brand that had been paying him to wear their products sent an email terminating their contract within hours of the incident. A travel company that had been working with him pulled their offer to sponsor future trips. Marcus was watching his income disappear in real time. Marcus' follower count, which had been steadily growing for months, began plummeting as people unfollowed him in massive numbers. He lost over 10,000 followers in the first day alone, as people decided they did not want to be associated with someone who had shown such poor judgment and disrespect. His dreams of becoming a major influencer were crashing down around him. The British authorities informed Marcus that he was being investigated for public order offenses and could face serious legal consequences, including fines and potentially being banned from entering the United Kingdom in the future. They explained that his behavior had been not just disrespectful, but potentially criminal under British law. Marcus realized that his fun vacation could result in a permanent criminal record. Hotel staff at Marcus' expensive accommodation began treating him differently after his face appeared on the news. The friendly service he had received when he first arrived was replaced by cold professionalism and barely concealed disgust. Even the taxi drivers and restaurant workers seemed to recognize him and showed their disapproval through their body language and tone of voice. Marcus spent his first night after the incident lying awake in his hotel room, reading the thousands of negative comments about his behavior and watching his reputation crumble across every platform he had worked so hard to build. Marcus spent the remaining days of his London vacation hiding in his hotel room, afraid to show his face in public. Every time he tried to leave the hotel, he worried that someone would recognize him from the viral videos and confront him about his behavior. The confident social media influencer who had arrived in London just a week earlier was now a broken and humiliated person who had lost everything he had worked to build. The video of Marcus' encounter with Sergeant Mitchell became one of the most watched clips of the entire year, but not in the way he had hoped when he started his live stream. Instead of gaining the fame and recognition he craved, Marcus had become a cautionary tale about the dangers of social media culture and the importance of treating other people with basic human dignity and respect. News outlets around the world continued to cover the story for weeks after the incident. Marcus' face appeared on television programs and newspaper articles as an example of the worst kind of tourist behavior. Cultural experts and military advocates used his story to discuss the importance of understanding and respecting the traditions and values of other countries when traveling abroad. Sergeant James Mitchell was praised internationally for his professionalism and incredible restraint in handling such a difficult and disrespectful situation. Military organizations and veteran groups held up the sergeant as an example of the discipline and honor that defined the Queen's Guards. His measured response to Marcus' provocation showed the world what true strength and character looked like. Marcus eventually worked up the courage to record a public apology video from his hotel room, but the damage to his reputation was already permanent and irreversible. His apology seemed forced and insincere to most people who watched it because it came only after he had faced serious consequences for his actions. Many viewers felt that he was only sorry because he got caught and punished, not because he truly understood why his behavior was wrong. The few remaining sponsors and business partners that Marcus had been working with dropped him after seeing his weak apology. His social media follower count continued to decline as more people decided they did not want to support someone who had shown such poor judgment and lack of respect for others. Marcus' dreams of becoming a major influencer were completely destroyed. Marcus returned to California with his tail between his legs and had to move back in with his parents because he could no longer afford his expensive apartment. His family was embarrassed and disappointed by his behavior and the negative attention it had brought to their name. Marcus' mother cried when she saw the videos of her son being so disrespectful to a military serviceman. The incident became a turning point that forced Marcus to completely reevaluate his priorities and his understanding of what was truly important in life. He realized that he had been so focused on getting attention and validation from strangers on the internet that he had lost sight of basic human decency and respect for others. Marcus began to understand that real people were not props or content for his entertainment. Marcus started volunteering at a local veterans organization to try to make amends for his disrespectful treatment of Sergeant Mitchell. He worked with counselors and therapists to understand why he had behaved so poorly and how he could become a better person. The process was long and difficult, but Marcus was determined to learn from his mistakes and grow as a human being. The story of Marcus' humiliation at Buckingham Palace became required viewing in social media literacy classes and cultural sensitivity training programs. Teachers and parents used his example to show young people the importance of thinking before acting and considering how their behavior affects others. Marcus had become famous, but for all the wrong reasons, and his moment of viral fame had cost him everything that truly mattered in life.